Now, I had started learning a lot more. My kids were getting attacked nonstop. Like I said, my son, his behavior, all of a sudden they started labeling him as a problematic child, saying he's getting in trouble, and they were influencing his behavior. I know this for a fact because one time when we were at the school, we were on low income. So my son, he had a disability. They said he had a disability, so they were giving him Medicaid for disability. So they told me, one of the teachers came up to me and said, hey, you can get some, one of you can sign up for our therapy. We have therapy for the children. It's like, well, I don't think we need that. I mean, I was seeing a therapist I had a therapist I was having my children see because they dealt with some trauma back when they were younger through, sexual abuse from one of their biological father had sexually abused them. So they had seen a therapist before for that. And so at this time, I'm like, well, we don't really need these services. They kept saying, oh, well, he has an IEP. He has Medicaid. Your insurance will pay for it. And he was really adamant and pushy about me signing up for these services. So he wanted me to have this meeting with this woman. So it's like, okay, fine. Look, I'll have the meeting, but I'll see what it's about first. That's what I told him. So I went to the meeting with this woman, and when I walked in there right away, she's just telling me how she was a graduate from Ohio State, and I'm listening to her. She's talking about the program. Then all of a sudden, my head started hurting me. It was excruciating pain, and I had this headache throughout the duration of this entire interview that we were having, and this meeting. It made it very difficult to focus because it was so painful. It reminded me of a migraine. When I was pregnant, I had migraines, and this was so painful. And I could not focus. It's like, it almost felt like someone was taking some type of ice pick and hitting me upside the head with it. It was more than a migraine. It was pain, like someone was cutting at the crown of my head. And I'm like, I knew it was her. I knew it was her. I by then I had gotten used to these tactics because they were doing it all over. On jobs, I was getting headaches, coughing fits. They were attacking me everywhere. So I was trying to pray under my breath while listening to her, and she kept pushing me to sign up for the program. And I'm thinking like, no, because I didn't trust her. I knew she was dealing with sorcery. I knew she's involved in witchcraft. By her giving me a headache right in that interview, I said, I'm not going to send my son with her. I didn't trust her. She wanted to take my son alone for these lessons. And she said she has a lot of children who she'll take to the library and she'll teach them and help them, give them services. I said, I don't feel that we need these services. That's exactly what I told her. And I said, I don't feel we need the services. And I kind of ended the meeting. And so 2 days later, my son came home and told me, he said, that woman, you had the meeting with, he said, that Mrs. Meadows woman, you had that meeting with. He's very observant. And he was in like the 2nd or 3rd grade at that time. And he said, she was in my classroom today. I said, what was she doing in your class? He said, I don't know. She was just standing there looking at me. She was staring at me the whole time. I was like, what, really? I was like, for a minute, I'm like, I told him I didn't want him to have these services. So I'm thinking like, are they still trying to do it anyway? Even though I said no. And I was a little bit upset. And so I was going to call his teacher, and I decided not to. He came home again, and I said, was she in your classroom? He says, no, she wasn't in there today. And so I didn't think anything else of it. Then all of a sudden, my son started coming home complaining of headaches. So he told me that he had a headache. And then I started getting a phone call. I got a phone call from the principal telling me my son, who they had previously told me was well behaved, they started saying that for some reason out of nowhere he punched a girl in the face. He said that was out of character for him. And I was a little upset. I'm like, what's going on? And I went up to the school and talked to them. They said he was going to have an in-school detention where for the next week he was going to be having his recess in the principal's office with the principal. And I was so humiliated, and I was embarrassed. And I don't know why it is, but Black people, a lot of us, we feel really embarrassed when our behavior is not what it's supposed to be, especially around Caucasian people. And this is another form of bondage, like we always have to live up to their standards. And the Lord was showing me that, but this was a predominantly Caucasian school, predominantly white children and white teachers. And I was mortified that my son had punched a girl in the face, and I was angry at him, and I reprimanded him when we got home. And I'm like, why did you do that? What did you punch a girl for? He says, I don't know. First he said he didn't know, and he looked completely blank, like he didn't understand what was going on. And I was so upset. I was like, what do you mean you don't know? You don't just punch someone for a reason. You don't do that. I told you to keep your hands to yourself. And he said, she looked at me. She looked at me. And I was like, I was just so upset. And so I kind of gave him a punishment where he couldn't play on his video games because he loved video games. And he couldn't play on his video games. So later on that night, as I was getting ready for bed, the Holy Spirit put in my spirit that they did that. Mrs. Medelson and the woman who was in the classroom staring at him. He said they did it because they wanted me to sign up for those services. They wanted me to reconsider and make it seem as if my son needed their services. And see, this is the thing. This is when my eyes started connecting to the insurance and to the therapy and all this stuff. They were making money off of this. This woman was through an agency called Beachbrook. And they were contracted with the school to offer services inside the school for children who are already receiving Medicaid, children who had IEPs. And even though I told them I didn't need these services, they wanted me to push for these therapy services. And they said, notice they said your insurance will pay for it. So it's a way that they can get money. And so since I didn't sign up for the services, my son told me she came in there, observed him. She was in there in the classroom just staring at him the entire day. And she was loose in attacks of his mind, controlling his brain. She had demonically influenced him. The Holy Spirit told me all of this. I didn't know what was going on. And that's why, out of character, my son just went off and hit someone because they wanted to make it seem like he was a problematic child who needed these services. And that's when my eyes first opened to all of these behavioral health programs. And I spoke about this before. When I talked about this, they said that I was insane. And they came and had a police show up at my house and forced me to go down to a hospital saying that I was a threat to my child, even though I never imposed any type of danger to him. I had never abused him or harmed him. But they forced me down there and said that, oh, I posed a threat to him based off some things I said in a video. No, the thing was they didn't like the fact that I was disclosing truth of things that were going on and revealing things that were happening. And so they put me in a mental institution for 3 days, involuntary, made me stay there for 3 days. And this is what they do. They force, see all this stuff, God is going to be dealing with all of this. Because they have bullied people, they've attacked our children, they bully us, and they say we're insane or crazy if we speak out. They try to stifle our voices by either locking us up in prison, putting us in mental institutions, taking everything from us, like they'll take our children, take our jobs, take everything that we have, ruin our reputation. This is what they do. And this is something that is so wicked that God is about to ready to bring it down because this has been going on for too long. There are so many people who have suffered and not been able to speak out. And so I ended up taking my kids out of the school. I ended up taking them out because this woman had kept harassing my son to the point he came home one day. I picked him up because I couldn't even have him on the bus anymore. They were taking the bus and they were getting picked on the bus. The bus driver wasn't doing anything. And they were getting attacks from every end. And these were demonic spirits influencing the children to attack my kids. And the Lord was showing me I was praying every day. I was always warfaring and praying all the time. And the last straw was when I finally picked up my kids from school. My son looked at me, had a strange look on his face, and he looked so distraught and distressed. And he was just a 7 or 8 year old boy. He was so small and young. And to do this to a child is so cruel and wicked. But my kid, I'm like, what's wrong? He said, my head was hurting all day. And I said, why didn't you have the nurse call me? Why didn't you go to the nurse? Why didn't you call me? He said, I did. She wouldn't let me call you. And I was very angry. I was livid. And my son had to sit there in excruciating pain all day. And his head had been hurting so bad that as soon as we got in the house, we got out of the car, as soon as we got in the house, he came inside the home and he threw up right there on the floor. His head had been hurting him so bad that he threw up. Have you ever had a migraine to the point where neurologically it causes you to feel nauseated? That's how bad his head was hurting him. This woman had sat in the classroom attacking him all day to the point he vomited. And I took my kids out of that classroom. I mean, the stuff that we went through. When I say we were tormented by the kingdom of darkness, my children, little children, you do this to children. But these people are evil. See, they're selfish. They want their kids to be safe. Some of them don't even care about their own children, to be honest. But a lot of them, they want what they want. They want their children to have things. They want people to do for them and their kids. They want to have all these benefits. But they don't mind destroying families, destroying people to get what they want. And so we ended up moving. By this time, we were moving all over the place. My kids had been to numerous schools. They called CPS on me one time, and we ended up moving to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And my kids kept missing days there because they were making them ill there. They were making them ill. My kids kept having all these stomach ailments. My daughter started having seizures. And it was just so much going on.